You in the middle in the brown shirt. Yes. Nope. Halfway up on the left-hand side. Yes, just forward. Yeah. Oh. Sorry, I was hesitating to point out that you were bald, and I thought you might be insulted, but I realized that, yeah. You probably know. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the question. I just would like to, you commented on some of the initiatives that you committed to in the leading up to the last election, and some of the things that you were able to deliver on in terms of certain spending initiatives. Could you comment, I believe that you quoted about balancing a budget at some point in time by 2019, and you had certain quotes that were made, you know, reflecting that it will balance, and I don't remember the exact words. And now we're in a spot where it is going to be balanced, I think, when there's some people still alive that are in this room. And I would like to know your comment on that, because a lot of the items that you spoke to have been related to spending, which did get some excitement, but I'm curious on some of the other initiatives, or if you could comment on that, with the exception of not commenting in regards to changing the metric for measuring the performance of the economy relative to the budget and the balancing of it. Thank you very much.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for your question. Obviously, it's a question that's fundamental about fiscal responsibility. People want to know that government is actually investing in the kinds of things that are going to make it easier to succeed and grow the economy in meaningful ways in the coming years. And one of the metrics that people look at is, are you in balance? Are you taking in as much money as you are spending out and investing? In Canada, on an economy that's close to $2 trillion, on a federal budget that's around $300 billion, we have a deficit of about $20 billion. Now, one of the things that was, as you mentioned in the last election campaign, a differentiation point between the Liberal Party of Canada and Mr. Harper and the Conservative Party of Canada was on our approach to fiscal discipline. The Conservatives worked hard to balance the budget at all costs just in time for the election, because they felt that that was a really important message to Canadians. They rushed the Phoenix pay system. They shuttered veteran services offices to save $9 million. They made cuts to a number of programs, including the Canadian Border Services Agency, which is a little bit ironic given their critiques around immigration. They made a decision that it was most important to create a balance at the last minute just in time for the election. We made a different choice. We realized that what Canada needed was investment, that people were worried about being able to afford the cost of living, be able to provide a good future for their kids. So we said, what we're going to do instead is invest in the middle class. We're going to do that right off the bat by lowering taxes for the middle class and raising them on the wealthiest 1%, which was the first thing we did. Then we're going to move forward with a Canada Child Benefit that gives more money to 9 out of 10 Canadian families, because we're sending more money to the middle class and folks working hard to join it, and we're not sending child benefit checks to the wealthiest Canadians, because they don't need it. And that has made, as Ralph mentioned, that's $1 billion a year flowing into the pockets of the middle class in Saskatchewan and making a huge difference in people's lives. We've also made historic investments in infrastructure that is making a positive difference, whether it's housing, whether it's things like flood mitigation infrastructure, whether it's things like roads and ports that are helping us trade with the world. We're also focusing on closing the gaps with Indigenous peoples, making sure that we are looking at them as true partners and stewards of the land, and making sure that an Indigenous student going to school gets the same amount of money invested in them as a non-Indigenous student going through a provincial school. These are things that are investments in our future. So yes, there are things that, as you point out, cost money. So how do we know that we're not just spending in an irresponsible way? Because people want to know that we are being thoughtful about making sure that we're not spending beyond our means or investing beyond our means. That's why we look at something that we talked about in the election campaign. It's not a new metric, It's the idea that our debt as a country, as a share of the economy of our country, should be low and getting lower every single year. And that's exactly what we have. We actually have the lowest debt to GDP ratio of most of our allies in the G7 and the OECD. And every year, even with the investments we're making in veterans, in seniors, in families, in Indigenous people, in infrastructure, our debt to GDP ratio continues to decrease. So Liberals believe deeply in fiscal responsibility. We were the ones that balanced the budget once again in the 90s. But what we saw under the previous government was $150 billion added to our national debt, more than any other government had ever done in our history, and stubbornly low growth to show for it. What we've been able to do over these past years, these past 3 years, is create 800,000 new jobs across the country, have the lowest unemployment rate in Canadian history just a few months ago. And here in Saskatchewan, we've created over 10,000 new jobs, people in Saskatchewan have created over 10,000 new jobs over the past year because we are focused on creating the conditions for that kind of success. So there were two very different visions of the economy on display in the last election. Stephen Harper and the Conservatives, who thought you could cut your way to balance, and had tried that for many years with a little version of trickle-down in there of giving tax benefits and advantages to the wealthiest in the hopes that that would stimulate economic growth. We had the lowest growth rate since the depths of the Great Depression under Stephen Harper. And over the past 3 years, we have created growth, we have created jobs, we're investing in our universities, in our science, in training, in Indigenous peoples, in closing the gaps, in infrastructure. We are creating economic growth that is making a real difference, not just for a few Canadians, but in the lives of all Canadians. And that is our approach to fiscal discipline and growing the economy. Thank you very much, sir, for your question. Another question.